In my message this week, I talked about God being light and what that image gives us some idea of what God does. It doesn't really describe his character because his character is beyond description. There's something I came across after the message I preached. I was reading this morning is that this author says that God is what is called ineffable. That is, he's impossible to conceptualize, to imagine, to picture, because he is beyond our ability to understand. And all our language about God, he says, is more inaccurate than accurate. In other words, anything we say tells us less about God than we really think it does. And it actually sometimes points us in the wrong direction if we're not careful. He says it's natural for us to form a picture of God and try to imagine his existence. It's just natural. On the one hand, we often end up with an image of God as some kind of superman or superhero, a person like ourselves, except wonderful superior to us in every way. And he points out that's not an accurate conception of God. On the other hand, sometimes we try to form a picture of God and imagine God's existence and something else happens. We come up dry and empty, unable either to picture God or imagine God's existence. He says when this happens, when we try to imagine God's existence and come up empty, the failure is not one of faith but of imagination. We are living not so much inside atheism as inside God's ineffability, that word, inside the cloud of unknowing and the dark night of the soul. God's ineffability puts God outside our imaginative capacities. Our minds are overmatched. God is still real, still there, but our finite imaginations are coming up empty, trying to picture an infinite reality. He says it's sort of like what happens when you try to imagine the highest number possible, and it's never high enough because numbers go into infinity. Our minds just can't get our hands around it. It's like if you go out, I used to do this as a kid on my dad's boat. One time we were out in the middle of the boat and it was dark and this out in the middle of Lake Michigan, and there were the stars, and I tried to imagine an infinite universe, and always I would come to some end, some boundary, because my mind could not grasp something that is infinite. So this week and in the weeks to come, as I talk about God, I want you to understand our language is very limited. But that doesn't mean that we can't know something about God. This week, God is light, and there's no darkness in him, and he invites us into a relationship, and his whole purpose of being light is to drive away our darkness, to bring purity, to bring truth to our lives, to give us life. And so this week, as you think about God being light, and you take that image and you consider it in regards to what we know about light, as you turn on the light and you see the darkness dispel, what does that say about what God wants to do in our lives? When the light comes and we see how the world really is, how does that help us understand what God's trying to do for us? So this week, take some time to think about God being light. Think about how God invites us into a relationship where we experience that sense of purity and truth. Take each of those characteristics and think about how God might be working in a relationship with you to bring greater purity, to drive out our darkness or to transform our darkness. How might God be using light to reveal the truth to us? How might, knowing that God is life, how is he trying to infuse life into us? In how and what ways is he relating to us that we might receive these wonderful blessings he wants to give to us? So contemplate the image, the idea that God, in very small ways, is like light.